right, y'all. We are on chapter 9 of The Importance of Being Ernest, the life of actor Jim Varney. Um, uh, I'm just going to read the one chapter. It's a fairly good size chapter, and we'll just do that because the next one's long too, so I don't want to be here all night. All right. So we got chapter 9, Finding Glory with Cherry. Although Jim longed to grace the stage of a major Broadway production, he still had to make a living in the meantime. In Tennessee, Jim continued to find one opportunity after another. Perhaps it was fitting that an advertising agency based in Nashville ultimately provided Jim the opportunity of a lifetime, one that would lead to Tennessee becoming his permanent home. According to Joe Lyles, in the fall of 1972, Melissa Farrell got auditions for herself and Jim through a new talent agency in Nashville called TML, Talent and Model Land. A woman named Betty Clark ran it, and Clark sent the two out for commercials. Jim soon caught the eye of advertising men Tom Farrell, no relation to Melissa, and John Cherry. An ad agency named McDonald, Carden, Cherry, and Farrell was holding auditions for several female actors for a commercial for Purity Diaries. In the spot, a drill sergeant named Sergeant Glory demonstrated how to open the new plastic milk jug that Purity was now using. The character addressed two needs of the client: addressing the product and educating the customer about its new packaging. As the camera pulled back, it was revealed that Sergeant Glory was not speaking to soldiers but to a group of female shoppers. According to Tom Farrell, Melissa was attempting to land one of the female roles. Tom Farrell remembers his first encounter with Jim. Melissa said she was with someone I should take a look at. He had been doing theater in Lexington and wanted to work in Nashville. I saw his face and thought it was interesting. At first, I didn't consider him for the part of Sergeant Glory, but he impressed me on how he could change characters in a second. I gave him some of the Sergeant Glory lines, and he was great. I spent more time with him explaining that I had made arrangements with the Marines for some mannerism training, and the hair and the earring would obviously have to go. The best I remember is that he snapped to attention, saluted, and replied, "Yes, sir." The first Sergeant Glory commercial was a success, and soon the character was using his army clout in subsequent commercials to motivate everyone from dairy workers to actual cows in producing a superior product. Just as Jim's famous Ernest character would years later, Sergeant Glory inserted humor into a product where few saw advertising potential. Years later, when being interviewed, Jim talked about the character and how the dairy industry never before had a wow factor when it came to marketing. he jokingly claimed, "In the dairy business, you either like milk or you don't. There's no superior cow. Organic farmers these days would probably beg to differ." In addition to Sergeant Glory, Jim began performing in other TV ads for the agency using characters from his vast arsenal. Jim played everything from Hungarian ringmaster to a sleazy car salesman who smoked a cigar and wore a pencil-thin mustache. It was the car salesman commercials where John Cherry first experimented with filming Jim using a wide-angle lens. The way in which it amplified Jim's facial features worked well for the tone Cherry wanted. The wide-angle lens would become the standard when Ernest came along. That's true. Taking advantage of Jim's ability to imitate famous people, Cherry also used Jim in radio ads imitating such celebrities as John Wayne. During the time Jim was working with Cherry, he remained vigilant in his quest to make it to Broadway. He decided to return to New York in the summer of 1973. Watkins was still living there, and Jim hoped that he could help him find new opportunities. Just to have a good friend close by made the city less lonely. According to Lyles, Watkins was quite the moral support for Jim for many years. Jim's dreams were big, but his bank account was not. Jim lived in a rundown apartment in Spanish Harlem. He was a starving artist. Lyles came to see Jim in September 1973. Lyles was living in Boston and doing well, working in PR as well as training salesmen for a casket company. When Lyles saw Jim's apartment and the malnourishment beginning to show on his frame, he took Jim out to buy groceries. As Lyles remembers, Jim was grabbing up boxes of oatmeal, bags of potatoes, jars of peanut butter, and it just went on. And the following Saturday, Lyles met up with Jim at Watkins' apartment. The three decided that Jim should try out some of his stand-up material at a popular new comedy club in the city, Rick Newsman's Catch, a Rising Star. It was an open mic night. During the cab ride over, they threw out lines and bits for Jim to consider. After they arrived, Jim was able to grab one of the last spots. Even though his material was far from polished, Jim received a warm reception. That was enough for him to want to return. With the encouragement of the other rising young comic like Freddie Prinze, Jim's performances grew stronger. He also performed at another comedy club in the city called Pips. It looked like stand-up was a better gateway for advancing his career than Broadway. Oh, I got people. All right. Well, that's inappropriate, but I will smile for you. All right, I'm going to continue reading my book. Here, I'll take a drink. All right. Still, he wanted to act, so much that Jim returned to Lexington to save up more money and work on new routines for an eventual stab at Los Angeles. He thought maybe television or movies might hold opportunities. After seeing comedian Jimmy Walker land a starring role in the TV hit Good Times and watching Prinze rise to fame on Chico and the Man, Jim hoped that playing the big clubs in Los Angeles would bring him similar success. The area had become the place to be for aspiring comedians, thanks to Johnny Carson relocating the Tonight Show to Burbank. But soon after his return to Lexington, a new romance began to take precedence over his career. Jim moved into an apartment with a new girlfriend and started to retreat from entertaining and, to his family's dismay, life altogether. Coincidentally, Lyles had also moved back to Lexington after moving his job in Boston. Lyles lived close by and stopped by to see Jim several times a week. They would talk about acting and kick around ideas for routines and characters. It was obvious to Lyles that both Jim and his girlfriend were not good for each other. He remembers seeing plates full of cigarette butts and decaying food piled up around their bed. Jim's family didn't see much of him during this time. Sister Jake remembers going to his apartment once after he had asked her for money. When she arrived, Jim met her out front, likely Jake surmised so she wouldn't see the inside of his place. Jim's father did little to intervene. He figured Jim's struggles would help him realize acting was no longer in the cards, and he would soon begin working toward a real profession. But Lyles knew Jim had real talent and wasn't cut out for a regular job. Lyles believed all Jim was lacking was confidence and motivation. Lyles' efforts to motivate Jim finally paid off one day when Jim asked him to be his manager. Lyles, surprised, replied, "What does a manager do?" Jim paused and then said, "I don't know." Man age? Lyles figured that whatever a manager did, Jim needed one. Lyles believed then, as he does today, that Jim was in desperate need of moral support. Jim trusted Lyles as someone who had his best interests at heart and would not take advantage of him financially. Lyles looked at Jim's career for a long-term perspective. He believed Jim had broad appeal and that he could take numerous roles, not just country characters. Meanwhile, Jim's family approved of Lyles for many reasons, including the fact that Lyles never used drugs or drank to excess. Over the next few months, Lyles let Jim come over to his apartment anytime he wanted to call long distance to Nashville. Lyles, as well as Jim's family, hoped that if Jim would get something going, he would leave his girlfriend behind. It wasn't before long Betty Clark found work for Jim and he was heading to Nashville in his father's car. After a short stint recording radio ads, Jim returned to Lexington excited about how things had gone. Lyles encouraged him to return to Nashville and agreed to join him and work on new material if Jim would commit himself to working hard. Jim agreed, and his girlfriend eventually parted, and Jim began concentrating full time on his career again. Jim moved to Nashville first in the early fall of 1974, and Lyles followed 6 weeks later. The two found a place to share in the basement of Dottie's Massage Parlor on 8th Avenue. Along with managing Jim, Lyles also paid his living expenses for about 2 years. Lyles recalls Clark saying, "Thank God he has someone to help him." I mean, that is a nice gesture of him. I mean, I guess he really believed in him. In no time, Clark got both of them small roles playing Confederate soldiers in Johnny Cash's Riding the Rails, the American Railroad story. Lyles actually had no acting ambitions of his own and took the role because Clark asked him to. The 1 hour TV special followed Cash as he took viewers back to important moments in the history of the American Railroad. Cash narrated and sang railroad themed songs throughout the production. The filming of Jim and Lyle's scene took place at the house of Cash, Johnny Cash's recording studio, which also housed his publishing operation in Henderson, Tennessee. In the scene, the two sit at a nighttime campfire in the company of fellow Confederate soldiers while Cash sings "The Night That Drove Old Dixie Down." At one point, the camera pans across the faces of the soldiers, pausing on Jim, who stares off into the distance. The grim look on Jim's face seemed to echo Cash's subsequent line about how the starving soldiers were barely alive in the last days of the Civil War. Jim could probably relate after his time in New York. During the taping of Rails, Jim ran into his friend Jack Ruth. The two had met years earlier. Ruth was a singer-songwriter and the husband of Caroline Carter, the singer and daughter of June Carter, who was by now Cash's wife. Ruth was also friends with Loney Hutchins, who ran the House of Cash publishing operations. Jim and Lyles became good friends with Ruth, Hutchins, and their wives. In the late spring of 1975, Lyles convinced Jim to go to a local club called The Exit and for a showcase night and perform stand-up. Despite his success in New York, Jim was nervous. He confessed to Lyles that he had bombed in Nashville once before, when he was in town for Sergeant Glory work. Jim had been staying in a motor inn where an outlaw country singer was performing. Jim and the singer were talking during a break, and Jim asked if he could go on stage and perform a few minutes of material. The crowd's response was not what he expected. Not a single laugh or chuckle in the house. Lyles worked to build Jim's confidence back up while helping him prepare new material. Lyles even went so far as to promise Jim he would join him on stage to perform if Jim bombed again. Lyles was glad he didn't have to go through with his promise. Jim became an immediate hit, enabling Lyles to get him additional bookings. From the beginning, Jim's stand up act was built upon his strength of imitation. One of Jim's earlier influences was comedian Jonathan Winters, who also used family members and local people from his hometown of Springfield, Ohio, as the foundation of many characters. Two of Winters' most popular characters were Maud Frickett and Elwood P. Suggins. Maud Frickett was based on an aunt of Winters who, despite being crippled and bedridden much of her life, had a funny way of expressing herself. Winters would wear a dress, no makeup, glasses, and a wig with a bun when portraying Frickert. He described her as a hip old lady whose age and conservative appearance allowed him to talk about controversial subjects without offending his audience. Elwood P. Suggins was a hillbilly. Winters said he was based on men who had come from Kentucky to work on Springfield in the Springfield factories. In one popular routine called The American Farmer, Winters portrays Suggins as a farmer who was paid by the government not to plant crops. Although the money was good, Suggins struggled to define for people what he actually did as a farmer. Jim took his similar gift of mimicry and turned it into hilarious depictions of colorful characters who also based on people in around his hometown. Jim's innate ability to imitate Southerners made his material all the more authentic and funny. Although his parents did not have a strong Southern accents, a Kentucky accent is more Midwestern as compared to, say, West Virginia. They did as colloquial phrases. They did use colloquial phrases, many of which are uniquely Southern. Jim grew up hearing his mother say, "Over yonder," and always colorful. She doesn't know an S from apple butter. Jim used various small towns in Kentucky and Tennessee as backdrops for his stories. Many of the most memorable were fictitious places such as the notorious Bulljack, Kentucky. Like Winters, Jim gave his characters peculiar names as Clyde Sperlin and Bunny Jeanette. Bunny was a female beautician who competes in talent contests, demonstrating her skill rolling hair with frozen orange juice cans. Clyde was a confused old man who calls a welding company inquiring about how they may repair the steel plate in the back of his wife's head. There was even dubious county coroner named George Asher who embalmed the living. Of all of Jim's early characters, Mountain Man Lloyd Rowe was arguably the funniest. In Jim's act, Lloyd often talked about his 8-year-old son named Mistake. He claimed the child weighed 250 pounds and was over 6 feet tall. Mistake didn't have toys like normal kids. During one routine, Lloyd talked about the chainsaw that Mistake carried around in a shoulder holster. Some of the characters Jim brought to life in these routines would eventually resurface in various incarnations in the many movies, commercials, and TV shows in which Jim would star. Lloyd became Ernest's uncle, Lloyd Worrell, in the television special Hey Vern, It's My Family album. The character later made his uncredited big screen debut as a snake handler in the movie Ernest Saves Christmas. Soon after Lyles joined Jim in Nashville, he browsed the yellow pages in the phone book for talent agencies and found out that William Morris had recently opened an office in the city. Before he got a chance to follow up, a William Morris representative approached Lyles after one of Jim's performances at the Exit Inn. The rep had heard about Jim from the club's owner and was interested in signing him. Jim was skeptical at first, but Lyles assured him the man was legitimate. After some discussion, Jim eventually signed with William Morris. The signing had no effect on the business relationship between Jim and Lyles, who remained Jim's manager. The first thing the agency needed was a bio of Jim. and Lyles quickly wrote up a page and a half of information. Lyles admits the spin and the BS was a little heavy, but it worked. Also attached to the bio was a list of Jim's talents. just It's just a list. After signing with William Morris, Jim and Lyles had the expectation of bookings on the college circuit and exposure to TV, commercial and film departments in New York and Los Angeles. A videotape of Jim's commercials was made and copies distributed throughout the agency. Unfortunately, they didn't generate any interest in the New York office. They found the humor too rural and couldn't see past the production value to Jim's acting. Still, he got more bookings in Nashville, and although he didn't know it yet, the signing would pay off when he eventually reached Los Angeles. Nashville wasn't Los Angeles, but it still had a number of big stars. Perhaps none bigger than the man in black himself, Johnny Cash. He showed up one evening in the Exit Inn with his daughter Roseanne to see singer Dan Fogelberg. Jim happened to be the opening act that night. Lyles remembers a line of people extending down the side of the building in the street waiting to get in. Lyles spotted Cash and his daughter and decided to introduce himself as a friend of Cash's son-in-law, Jack Ruth. I invited him to come into the club as our guest. He declined because he was uncomfortable cutting in front of so many people. Lyles didn't give up, explaining that his offer was more of a favor to a friend's father-in-law than a gesture to a famous star. Amused, Cash agreed to follow him. Lyles' invitation paid off. As he recalls, Cash was knocked out by Jim's act and told Jake, Ruth, and Lonnie Hutchins how great he thought he was. Although Jim and Lyles had played extras in Cash's TV special about the American Railroad, they had not gotten to know him personally. Ruth and Hutchins continued to stay in touch with Lyles and Jim and had also seen one of Jim's performances at the Exit Inn and were impressed. Even though Ruth and Hutchins had nothing in common professionally with Jim and Lyles, the four had mutual respect and a desire to see each other succeed. Around this time, Ruth had a single release that was produced by Chet Atkins. Jim and Lyles would constantly call the radio stations and request it. Jim continued his stand-up appearances at this Exit Inn, including a particularly well-received when opening for Dr. Hook. Oh, hell yeah. I love Dr. Hook. Opening for Dr. Hook, a country-flavored rock band also known as Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. Lyles remembers the impact it made at the time. When Jim opened for Dr. Hook in the Medicine Show, that was a big deal. They had been opening for the Rolling Stones on a long European tour, and Dr. Hook got the audience so worked up that the Stones had no place left to take them. So Dr. Hook took over the headlining position, and the Stones started going on first. That was an amazing achievement for any band in 1975. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool factoid about old Dr. Hook. I love Dr. Hook. Jim had gone over great that night. His confidence, timing, everything was spot on. The audience had Bobby Bare, Jesse Coulter, Shel Silverstein, and a bunch of people from the real Nashville musician scene. Johnny Cash had heard about that. Ruth and Hutchins updated Cash about Jim whenever they could. It wasn't long before they arranged to bring Cash to see Jim perform again at the Exit Inn. This time didn't go as smoothly as before. In fact, it really didn't go at all. Jim was supposed to open for outlaw country music singer David Allan Coe. Man, I like all these acts and stuff. But it turned out that the singer's contract had a rider specifying no opening act. Jim couldn't perform. He had never received a confirmation from William Morris that would have given him the information, but Jim ended up giving an impromptu performance to Cash, Coe, and a few of the other friends outside the club at the end of the night. Lyles remembers, after Coe's show, Cash, Loney, Jack, Coe, and Jim were in the parking lot for a long time talking, laughing, and cutting up. Jim was on. He was ripping off quips, one-liners, and making jokes in character voices. Johnny was cracking up, as was Coe. Coe had on this outrageous outfit that looked like three cowboys and an Indian rolled all into one. That's a good description of David Allan Coe. Parts of the vest looked like someone had sprayed it with silver paint. He had feathers in his big, oversized hat and was generally like a mid-70s peacock. After a while, when everyone was flowing smoothly, Jim sort of clapped Coe on the arm and said, "You know, I got an outfit just like that. Did you get yours at Sears too?" It was a sort of earnest voice. It cracked up Coe, and Cash liked it also. Lyles was apologetic about the mix-up that prevented Jim from performing. Cash didn't seem to mind, especially after having a great time at the end of the evening. The icon was getting to know Jim on a personal level. The friendship was really a result of the perseverance of Hutchins and Ruth looking to help out Jim any way they could. Jim was finding his groove, and his stand-up and still earning money with advertising work. Tom Farrell had left the McDonald, Carden, Cherry, and Farrell agency after 5 years to start Tom 2 Productions. Jim did some work with Farrell's company in 1975, portraying a pirate character in several ads while continuing the Sergeant Glory work for John Cherry's agency, which had changed its name to Carden and Cherry in 1974. Jim continued traveling through Kentucky and Tennessee, performing stand-up and preparing for his move to Los Angeles. In addition to polishing material for his act, he was also refining his physical features for potential TV or film roles. In the summer of 1975, he had the follow-up surgery on his nose. Sections were loosened and reattached after trimming and shaping. It was starting to look good, and Jim was hopeful he'd now be a contender for leading man roles. The difference in his appearance was noticeable as it reflected even more of the Roman look Jim had wanted all along. Unfortunately, Jim did not follow the doctor's orders to refrain from physical activity following the surgery and injured his nose during a frisky encounter with a girlfriend. At that point, nothing could be done to reverse the damage. After a few days, Jim acted responsible for what had happened and the possibility that he might forever be limited to character roles. At what point he began to be more comfortable with his looks is not known. Lyles remembers a conversation with Jim around 1995 when Jim was 46, where Jim seemed to have come to like the way he looked. Jim made a comment about his face having an interesting character to it. Lyles was happy to hear that Jim was pleased with his looks even at such a late stage in his life. In October, Jim opened for the band Blood, Sweat, and Tears at Morehead University, located east of Lexington. It was a tough crowd for Jim. A reporter from the Lexington Herald-Leader interviewed him following his act, and Jim told the writer he was preparing to take a shot at Los Angeles. Sometimes you make it overnight, sometimes it takes a long time. It just depends on how bad you want it. It was obvious that at this point, Jim wanted it. Jim sent a letter home to his parents just before Thanksgiving. In it, he talked about how Ruth and his wife were expecting their first child and how excited everyone was. He also mentioned a party at Cash's place in Bon Aqua, Tennessee, where he was to have performed, but he then had been canceled. The last bit of news he included concerned Sergeant Glory film, a 10-minute movie to be shown during tours of the Purity Dairy plant, and that he had just completed that was to pay him close to $1,000. Well, all right, there it is. Oh, that was chapter 9. All right, we'll see y'all later for more of the book.